I'm Lauren Rivers, and welcome to part 3 of my 4-part video series on 4-act structure. This is Act 3. Well, that didn't work. So, the third act is the part of the story that consists of the section between the inevitable downturn and the final conflict lock. Now, we'll get into what those are later, but as you may recall from Part 2, the inevitable downturn was the end of Act 2, where whatever plan that your characters came up with to solve the core problem of the story, for one reason or another, it did not work. So, the descent towards darkness is effectively the search for Plan B. Your characters now have to find another way to deal with the problem, and this is probably going to result in a lot of moments that are going to test them as a group, as individuals, and the descent towards darkness also refers to your character heading towards the point where there is only one conclusion to what must happen at the end of Act 3. Now, we'll get into the specifics of that later, but suffice it to say that a lot of the beginning of Act 3 is, recovering from what just happened. Figuring out a new plan and kind of having your characters process that for a little while. Now, that kind of leads into what I would say would be the second aspect of Act 3, which is the hero confronts their demons. Now, in simpler terms, what that means is that the hero actually has to deal with their shit at this point. That the things that may have come out at this point, that they have to deal with whatever it is that they've been avoiding, and this is going to be necessary for them to face it on their way towards the end of Act 3. They are no longer going to be able to avoid things that had been affecting them up to this point, that they had been avoiding dealing with up to this point. Things that we'd seen in the first act. I mean, we may have seen hints of whatever it is that they're trying to avoid facing or to run from, or whatever the case may be. But Act 3 is when they finally have to come to terms with that and, at least on some level, start to deal with it. Because this is going to inevitably force them to what will happen in Act 4. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean, of course, at this point that any of this stuff needs to be resolved, but the fact is that it's one of the points where you can no longer ignore it. It has to be addressed, or at least something that they consider, because this is one of those things that's leading to an inevitable character growth moment. So we've all done it. We've all had those things where it's like there's something that we don't want to do, or that we'd rather not have to deal with, and characters are effectively just like us in that regard. But, they tend to have narrative assistance that basically makes them deal with stuff, whereas we might have the option to put it off. But the important thing is that Act 3, whatever it is that all of your characters have been avoiding at this point, this is when they're going to have to come to the point where they have to move forward, and forward is the only option. So, the third thing that I would like to talk about is that Act 3 also serves as a crucible. It burns away the impurities, it gets the story down to the bare essentials, that all of the extra stuff that would belong in Acts 1 and 2, it's like now with Act 3 we're finally getting into the meat of the characters, the meat of the story, the meat of everything that we're trying to deal with. This is, in a lot of respects, the part of the story where we are seeing the core of the characters, not just the parts of themselves that they want to show us. I think that Act 3 is a lot of where you get to really know who these characters are. It's just the first two acts are a lot of setup, a lot of getting the story going, a lot of getting the characters together, and at this point they've had a significant amount of time together. They've had a chance to become friends or become enemies, or just sort of get to know each other. And this is where the Crucible comes in, because now these characters know each other well enough to call each other on their shit. They know each other well enough to tell when something's wrong, even when they're not saying it. And, all of this kind of leads into and dovetails with what I would consider to be one of the important points of any meaningful relationship, which is facing the shocks of adversity. Because, everybody's heard the term fair weather friends, right? It's always easy to be friends when things are going well. But the true test of a relationship is when things are not going well, when things are tough, when things between you aren't smooth. It's like it is the point where you start to consider, what's more important? Is this relationship worth whatever I may suffer as a result of it? And in most cases, ideally, you would like the answer to be yes. This is like, family. This is friends. This is something where it's like sticking with this person is worth whatever may happen to them or to me. And I think that it speaks a lot to loyalty, that it speaks a lot to the character, the content of someone's character. And I think that it also means a lot about who we are as a collective group. That, like I said earlier, it's always easy to be friends when things are going well. But, what you really want to know is, are your friends going to be there when the going gets tough? And this is what the shocks of adversity is designed to do. This is where you're going to prove not only why your group is a group, why they are a team or friends or an alliance or whatever they happen to be, but also you're going to have to prove why the hero is the one leading the story. You have to show through what they do, through what they say, through what they feel, why this person is the person that is going to save the world, that the person is the one leading our group, is the one that forged the family together. It's like, this is one of those cases where we need to see why this character is a leader and feel it. And we need to also know that they are the leader for a reason. And, that there is no one else, at least in this capacity, that could do the same job. This is one of those cases where it's really time for your characters to shine their greatest virtues. And I think that I remember reading a book once where it had it was kind of like the point of the story that friends, it's like, it's easy, it's always a proof of the strength of friendship when it has to handle stress. And I think that that's very true. And I think that that's very important that be reflected in your story. That, what happens when the chips are down? What do your characters do? What does your narrator do? What does everybody do? And it may not necessarily just be limited to the protagonist. It's like the antagonist as well. It's like, how strong is their empire? How strong is their group? It's like, what makes them such a credible threat? And a lot of that has to do with the same thing. Shocks of adversity. It's like, empires, kingdoms, whatever. It's like, if you can't handle stress, your organization, whatever it is, will not last long. And it is kind of, I guess, one of those things where it's just like on both sides. It's like, we need to see why these people are who they are. Basically, show us their credentials. And the last thing in Act 3 is that once we've reached the act of, you've reached the end of Act 3 when you have hit one of two things. Now, this may depend on your story. It may, in fact, be the same thing. But you either have found the key, which is the answer to everything. It's like, we figured out, who the traitor was, what the artifact is, what it does, or, where the bad guy's base is. Whatever it is, we have found the thing that will lead us to the conclusion of the story. And whatever that item, that piece of knowledge, that person is, this is the critical thing that signifies the end of Act 3. It's like, we have now found exactly what we need to know what Plan B is. And the other alternative is a conflict lock, which may, in fact, again, be part of the same thing. But a conflict lock effectively means that the characters have reached a point where they must confront the antagonist. There is no alternative. There is no other way to avoid this. This is the end of Act 3, leading into Act 4. This is when this must happen. So, to use, a popular, a common example or something, let's say that the the bad guys, they've completed their super weapon and they're about to use it. Well, it's like, you have to deal with this, and it's going to be a case where it's either you win or you lose. Now, we'll get into that much more in Act 4, but suffice it to say that conflict lock means that you have only two choices: face it or effectively lose. And that may not seem like much of a choice, but that's kind of the point. The conflict lock means that your character must move forward in order to conclude the story. So that's my video in Act 3, and I hope it has proven educational for you, and I will see you in Act 4, All or Nothing. If you like werewolves, check out my book Blue Moon, available in paperback and ebook on Amazon. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, click the subscribe button and leave a comment below. Catch you later.